We consent to being recorded.
All righty. Well, then, welcome to the July 16th, 2025 meeting of the Arlington's Transportation Future Advisory Group. This meeting is open to the public, and time for public comment will be reserved for the end of the meeting. During the main portion of the meeting, conversation is limited to members of the advisory group, as well as staff and consultants who are supporting the advisory group. All meeting participants, please keep your devices muted until you're called upon by the chair. That's me. If you lose internet connectivity during this meeting, don't hesitate to reconnect via phone. The Microsoft Teams chat is there for just two purposes. One is for advisory group members who need technical assistance, and two is for members of the public to add their name to the list for public comment, which will be taken at the end of the meeting. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion. Those who are planning to provide public comment will need to do so at the end of the meeting verbally, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned period. For my advisory group members, I think this is all old hat for most of us, but if you wish to be recognized to speak during the meeting, just raise your virtual hand in Teams and then wait to be called upon. If advisory group members are participating via phone today without the hand raise option, go ahead now and unmute and let me know you're via phone, and then I will check in with you from time to time during the meeting. I don't actually see anyone join to this meeting via phone, so I think we're good to go on that regard. And then for members of the public who might be here, if you'd like to provide feedback and comment, you will be called on to speak at the end of the meeting, and you'll get 2 to 3 minutes to speak on tonight's agenda item. That speaking time will depend on how many speakers we have and how much time we have left, but it will be at least 2 minutes. If you wish to speak, you can go ahead and put your name in the meeting chat at any time, and we'll add you to the speakers list. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. And so without further ado, I think we can move on with our agenda, which is introductions. I will kick things off. I am Chris Slatt. I am the chair of this advisory group, and then I will pass things over to staff to introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'm Kristen Calkins. I'm the project manager for Arlington's Transportation Future. I'm joined with a number of staff from the county as well as our consultant team. I'll start with staff. So let's have Allison, Brian, Aaron, and Nate go, and then David, your team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Bullock. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager here at Arlington.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Shelton. I'm the Active Transportation Planner and Deputy Project Manager.
And I'm Erin Potter. I do communications and public engagement for the Transportation Division, including supporting this process.
And I'm Nate Graham. I also do communications and public engagement for transportation projects, including this one.
And good evening, everyone. My name is David Samba with Kimley Horn, and I'm the consultant project manager.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carmine Perez-Gondola. I'm with Kimley Horn, supporting the project with David.
And then Chris, do you want to run us through the advisory group introductions?
Yep, just making sure there wasn't another consultant I had missed. All right, Arlington Neighborhoods Advisory Committee. Anyone here from ANAC tonight? All right, how about Bicycle Advisory Committee?
Yeah, Dana Bress standing in for Mike Hanna.
Welcome, Dana. C2E2?
Joan McIntyre, C2E2E.
Welcome, Joan. Commission on Aging.
Hi, everyone. Catalina Calichan.
Welcome, Catalina. Disability Advisory Committee. Commission.
Hello. Hi, everyone. This is Elizabeth Prio.
Welcome, Elizabeth. Economic Development Commission.
Evan Pritchard here for EDC.
Good to have you, Evan. Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission. All right. Forestry and Natural Resources Commission.
Yes, John Carey. I'm replacing David Howell, who used to be on the commission.
Welcome, John. Neighborhood Complete Streets.
Aaron Schutz, how you doing?
Welcome, Aaron. Parks and Rec Commission. All right, apparently nobody from Parks and Rec. Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Pamela Van Hine with the PAC.
Glad you were able to make it, Pam.
Barely, but I'm here.
Planning Commission.
This is Tony Striner. I'm checking in with the Planning Commission.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. I know we were not going to have anybody from Transit Advisory tonight, but how about Transportation Commission?
Hey everyone, Justin Furman for Transportation Commission.
And I think Bill just came in.
Bill, you want to introduce yourself for Arlington Neighbors Advisory Committee? All right, maybe having some tech
That's
issues,
fine.
but that's fine. We know you, Bill. We can move into the meat of the meeting.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here this evening. Tonight, we're going to start talking about next steps, where we go once the vision and goals are endorsed by the county board. We are very excited to start talking about the future. This future is how we kind of think about the vision and goals and how we achieve them. One of the first steps to that is understanding kind of what our current future under the existing transportation plan looks like. What that current trajectory is. We're also going to be doing some scenario planning, scenario analysis to help us understand what transportation could look like under different futures, if policy decisions are made differently, if investments are made, or if there are changes outside the county's control from a economic or social preference perspective. All of this scenario analysis will help us understand how we can craft and draft policies and strategies that continue to work us to our goals under a lot of different futures that can happen. Scenario planning doesn't tell us the specific future we're working towards. What we're going to be doing is we're going to do exploratory kind of like work. We're going to think of a lot of different possibilities that could happen and choose a few that we think could best inform how the transportation network could be impacted by different types of futures. Changes to preferences on how people travel or when they travel or where they travel, impacts of changes to national policy or technologies that come along, and how these varying futures change the trajectory from our current plan. This is all, and I'm going to say it a number of times, is to help us make a more resilient policy and strategy document so that we create guidance that is resilient as we move forward, that works for us not just today, but in 5 or 10 years as this plan serves our community. We want that flexibility to make sure that the plan continues to work. When we think about scenario planning, we're thinking about potential futures. We're going to develop a couple of concepts to run and test. Those futures, depending upon what they be, if they're, EVs take over or AVs take over, if we have a transit heavy future, if people just stop traveling because everybody ends up working from home, there's so many different types of scenarios out there that we can think and talk about. We're going to pull a couple of those together into a package. We're going to look at them. We're going to run those in the model, in our transportation model, and see what happens. We're going to look at performance measures, things like travel time, VMT, mode split, to help us understand how transportation looks differently in those futures and whether or not we like the way it looks. Those performance measures that we're thinking about, lower VMT, higher mode shift, less, greenhouse gas emissions, those are things that we want to understand under these different scenarios. We're going to evaluate them and understand which scenarios have outcomes we like and which ones have outcomes we may need to think about policy or strategies to help avoid. It's not about choosing a future we want. It's about understanding what could happen and creating a plan that helps us get to the vision and goals that we are working towards. There are a couple of examples that we've looked at that we think are really helpful to frame this conversation about scenario planning. We know it's not something everybody does on a regular basis. We have a local example, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority transaction, our regional Northern Virginia transportation plan, had some scenario planning done for their most recent plan where they developed a couple of futures that they thought could arise. A future that focused on people who just didn't travel as much. Post-pandemic trends continued. This was done a couple of years ago before return to office had become as predominant. They looked at a scenario where roadway pricing was significantly increased to see what that would do to travel behavior. And then they really doubled down on a technology-driven future where EVs and AVs proliferated, and what would that do to the regional transportation network? They also created kind of another scenario where they really looked at heavy investments into transit. Across all of these different scenarios, they looked at what it did to person trips, how people travel, where people travel, what types of modes they're taking, how far they travel, how much congestion exists on the roadway, what access people have to jobs, and the impacts on emissions regionally. Denver recently adopted their transportation plan about 2 years ago, and part of that process for them was also doing scenario planning to understand what different futures they're working towards. Denver looked at 3 different futures, considering drivers of change like growth and the makeup of the city and its geography and where jobs are happening and things like that. But they really considered some scenarios that looked at really if heavy investments were made in green infrastructure and walkability in the city, what would that do to trip making decisions in Denver? What would it do for equity? What would it do for mode shift? What would it help? How could it help the climate crisis? They looked at a future similar to transactions where people just traveled less. It was a little bit of a pandemic plus future, not nearly as heavy as lockdown, but a continuation of those trends. And then they also looked at a future where they made some assumptions about technology and how that may change people's preferences to travel. They looked at who in Denver was making trips and where they were going, how they were making those trips. Were they walking, biking, taking the bus, using a scooter? They looked at what it did to VMT within the city. They looked at travel cost and the impacts that the different scenarios had on that. They looked at what it did to crashes. Were there more or fewer serious crash potentials under those different scenarios? And they also wanted to understand what it did to emissions. So we're going to be doing something similar. We are going to develop 3 potential futures. We're still thinking about that and talking about that. They're going to have varying trajectories to help us understand the policies that we need to create to work towards the vision that we already have for Arlington. These policies will be a refresh. They're going to help us continue to understand how we meet our goals. Some of these futures are maybe going to look appealing to us. They're going to have aspects we want to work towards. What was in a scenario that we can craft policy for? Or there's going to be potentials where it's like, we do not like that impact. BMT in a scenario skyrockets. What do we do? Is there policy we can craft, programs we can recommend that would help deter that future? We have policy levers, we have investment levers. There's a jurisdiction that we can use to respond to varying futures. And this exercise is all about helping us understand which ones might be the most important for us to consider. One of the tools that we're using in the scenario planning work is the transportation forecast model. This forecast model looks at the future. Its horizon year for us is 2050. But a lot of what it uses is based on how people make trip decisions today. It kind of assumes slight changes in trip preferences if we program it, but a lot of it assumes that people continue to move the same way they do unless changes happen to the network. The 2050 transportation network is today's network, along with anything that we've planned or programmed to be built by 2050, as well as the changes in land use that we assume. So all of the planned development we have on our metro corridors, along Columbia Pike, along Langston Boulevard, those are included in this model. It assumes, the transportation changes and investments we make in the future, as well as the population growth that we have planned as a county. Those are inputs. The who is traveling, the population, Arlington residents, workers, and visitors, those are the people moving and using the network. The places that they're getting, the specific land uses, whether or not they're going to work, to a restaurant, to a destination, that's a piece of information in the model that helps us understand how people make trips. How people want to travel. Do they prefer to drive? Do they prefer to take transit, the bus, metro? That's a piece that the model does and talks to us and tells us about. We put in information about where we think growth is happening based on the land use map, where we expect jobs, where we expect more housing, and then we also program in those expected changes to the transportation network. What the model tells us from that information we put in is what mode share looks like. How many people are driving? How many people are taking transit? how many people are riding the bus. It tells us how many people are just taking trips on a daily basis, how much movement there is within Arlington on the network. It tells us how many vehicle miles are traveled and can help us kind of see across scenarios what changes. It tells us travel time, how long it takes for average trips to happen. And it can tell us trip length, how far people are traveling on average, highs and lows. We can indirectly figure out too greenhouse gas emissions because VMT is kind of a proxy with the math for greenhouse gas emissions. And we can also make some assumptions about transportation costs. It's also important to talk about what the forecast model doesn't tell us. It's good to know the blind spots, right? This is just one of the tools that we're using as we consider scenario planning and our policy development. The forecast can only tell us information that we put into it as far as assumptions goes. It can't predict political and economic shifts. So if we have a recession that comes, it can't tell us what is going to happen in 2029 if there's another recession. It can't tell us the impacts of a pandemic. It can't tell us if there's what happens if there's a drastic change in policy approaches unless we do scenario planning around those, but it's not predictive. It can't just tell us that this is going to happen. It also can't account for unanticipated behavioral or technology changes. Unless we tell the model we think people are going to drive and ride in autonomous vehicles, it can't tell us people are going to do that. So it can't tell us what the impacts of e-commerce would be unless we say we anticipate e-commerce to happen. So the 2007 plan didn't account for the increase in, home delivery and e-commerce within the transportation plan process that they did then. So it's really important for us to think about that and remember that as we use this tool, it tells us certain things and we can use that information to help us build stronger policies and strategies, but it is not the only thing we consider as we do it. It's also important to recognize that forecast models are good at vehicle trips, personal vehicles, buses, trains, but it doesn't do a good job at capturing bike and ped trips very well. And that's because these models are really focused on longer trips that kind of go a decent distance, and our bike ped trips tend to be shorter. They don't leave the geographical node or zone that we have land uses kind of like assigned to. So if someone walks half a mile, it's not leaving the zone. So it's not really showing up as a trip in this model. And it's important for us to know that there's lots of trips that are going to certain places that aren't showing up physically on the network because they're staying relatively close to home. We recognize this, we understand what it can tell us and what we need to infer from the model as we use it to help refresh the transportation plan. And as we build our future scenarios, it's really important to think about what this current plan, the current future is what we're calling it, kind of if we just use the current plan for the next 30 years, what that future looks like. It's the continuation of our existing policies. It's the transportation network we have today, as well as the planned infrastructure and policy changes we plan to continue to make. And it's the population growth and employment growth that we anticipate as a county. This current future continues our investment in Vision Zero. It continues our investments in walking and biking. It continues to see us have high quality investments in transit and high frequency transit. And it continues the policy of coordinated land use and transportation in our sector plans and area plans that we see in the county today. We're calling this the current future when we talk about these scenarios. This is a little bit of a high level reference for when we talk about population and employment growth, where it's happening. From a population growth perspective, we're seeing it in the corridors you expect it: Columbia Pike, Langston Boulevard, the RB corridor, Richmond Highway. For job growth, we're actually seeing a little bit of decrease in the Roslyn-Ballston corridor because we're actually seeing a lot of office to conversions anticipated in the plan. And then job growth specifically in Pentagon City, i.e. National Landing. So that's kind of the land use assumptions that are baked into the model. And we see by 2050, approximately 74,000 additional residents in the county, 57,000 new jobs, 32% growth in people who live here, 27% growth of people who work here. The model says that's going to be about 33% more trips that are going to be happening by 2050. 394, almost 400,000 more trips. What the current plan shows happening under our current future is that we see growth across all modes. We see transit trips increasing, we see driving trips increasing, and we see people walking and biking more. The thing that is encouraging to see under our current plan is that while we are adding vehicle trips, it is not at the ratio that we are adding jobs and residents. We see a 32 and 27% increase in population and employment, but only a 13% increase in vehicle trips. That means our current plan is doing what we're asking it to do. We're asking it to move more people without significantly more traffic. And we're seeing a significant increase by 2050 in the people who choose transit and to walk and bike. 53% increases across both, which is more than the population increases and job increases in 2050. When we think about what that looks like from a mode split perspective, today, it's about 58% of people are driving, 26% are walking or biking, and 16% of people are taking transit. Under the current plan, we see fewer people driving. 51% of trips are now in personal vehicles. 30% are walking or biking, and 19% are in transit. It's getting better, but we know our vision is better than this. So it's helpful for us to understand what our current trajectory is as we think about scenarios we can develop. When we look at just kind of specifics of these trips, it's interesting to see where trips are ending and starting. For trips ending in the county in 2050, we see a 63% increase in people who take metro into the county, a 74% increase in people who take the bus into the county comparatively, and vehicle trips are at about 14%. We're seeing significant growth in people who are taking transit to the county. Internal to the county, we're seeing a 54% increase in people who just take the bus around the county. They're writing art. That's great. We're also seeing an increase in people who just start and end their trips in Arlington on metro. So maybe a trip that starts in East Falls Church and ends in Roslyn. We're seeing the increases how we want to see them, but maybe not at the rate we want to see. Maybe we want to see only 4% increase in vehicle trips ending in Arlington. But what it's showing us is that we are continuing to grow, and the policies that we have today in the plan are doing what we expect them to do. We're seeing growth without comparative growth in vehicle trips. When we think about VMT, we see approximately 500,000 more miles in the network driven on a daily basis by 2050. It's about a 12% increase. Remember, our population's growing by over 30%. Our employment rate is growing by 27%. So VMT is not going up the same way. And when we think about VMT and the number of people that are traveling compared to the miles that are traveling, we're actually seeing VMT go down in 2050. The overall number is still there. So we still want to think about how we move that overall number down. But the decisions people are making are different in the future, and that's good. And we want to think about how we can continue that trend. We're seeing, on average, 2.7 miles less traveled per person per day in a personal vehicle in 2050. That's great. What can we do to get it lower? But I think it's important for us to think about this plan as we look to the future. And it's not just, let's get rid of the transportation plan we have today. What do we think works in this plan? What do we want to do a yes and for? And what do we want to layer on top of it to make sure that our 2050, when we get there, is even better than what it could have been under this current plan? Another thing for us to think about is that today, 70% of vehicle trips that start and end in Arlington are less than 3 miles. That's about 260,000 to 520,000 miles worth of short trips on a daily basis that we can think about by 2050 having be done in a way that isn't driving. There's a lot of opportunity for growth under this plan for us to think about. Often we get that question about, yeah, but how long is it going to take me to drive in the future? We looked at our major corridors, and on an average daily basis, we're not seeing a significant increase in travel times. We have a few portions where you're having about a minute added to your trip on average throughout the day. So we're not seeing this increase overall in the time it's taking people to drive. Route 50 sees about a minute extra travel time if you're heading from Washington Boulevard to Carlin Springs. If you're traveling on Glebe from 66 to Columbia Pike, It's going to take you about a minute longer. And if you're on Columbia Pike from South 4 Mile Run to Washington Boulevard heading towards the district, it's going to take you a bit longer. We're not seeing on average throughout the day a significant increase in travel times. It is nice to see, though, under the current future, that for the peak period, and the transit travel times just made sense to report out on peak period, we're actually seeing them faster. The investments we're making in frequencies and more buses on our bus routes are relating to faster travel times for people who choose to take transit in the future. And that's good. Let's continue that in the future plan, and let's look at scenarios that could impact either positively or negatively on that, so we know how we keep moving towards the future we want. This is a little bit of an overall, bringing it all together about this current future that could happen if we keep using the current transportation plan. We see population and employment growth. We see trips increase overall, but significantly more metro, bus, and people walking and biking on a daily basis, and a increase in people who drive, but significantly lower than the population we add. The vehicle trip mode share decreases by 13%. Transit trips increase by 17% of the mode share. Non-motorized trips are 18% increase, and vehicle miles traveled are only increasing by 12% compared to now. It means that the current policies and strategies in the transportation plan work. They're promoting these high quality services we like, but we need to think about how we do more moving forward. How do we see our daily auto trips only increase to 6% or not at all by 2030 with the 2050 with a 32% increase? How do we even enhance our ability to see more people walking and biking on our network? How do we see VMT decrease even more? And the scenario work will help us understand what could happen across different scenarios, what policies we might want to craft, and what strategies we might want to think about as we work towards our new future or a refreshed future. So that's kind of the end of my presentation for now. We're going to open up to questions. Let us know if there's anything we shared or talked about that you have some clarifying questions about, and just kind of think about in your head the trajectory that we're working towards, what we want to see in the refreshed future versus what we're hoping for in our plan. So, and then I think I said VMT a number of times without saying it literally. It's vehicle miles traveled. It's how many vehicle miles per person you travel on a daily basis. And Chris, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. All right, folks, if you have questions about what was presented right now, I know this is a lot of material. There's so much coming in phase 2. We really felt like we needed to get a bunch of information into your heads in this meeting so that we don't have a 4-hour long meeting in September or whatever. So cool. Joan, I think you're up first. Go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of curious in terms of the modeling and, what you've, how does this, how is this validated? I mean, have you kind of looked at the modeling in terms of what's comparing past trends in the models to say, how accurate it could be? I mean,
So-
it's a projection for the future that's kind of hard to deal with, but, it's how, how comfortable should we feel about it?
So forecast modeling, and we do have our Kimley Horn forecast modeler with us, but I'm going to try to do a layperson's explanation of this. Is the forecast model has been validated and calibrated regionally for a very long time. It is based off of a lot of inputs from regional household travel surveys to preferences to what has happened, and MWCOG does kind of a retrospective on it every 5 years as well to see how it's working and what it's doing. It is the model that we use. It's the model that all of the jurisdictions in the region use. We have a relative confidence level with it. It's also the asterisk of we have a relative confidence level with it. It tells us information, but it is not the only piece of information we use in this process.
Thank you.
All right. Aaron, I think you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. Joan kind of took my first question. I am a fan of Harry Seldon, if you guys know. Predicting the future can be a challenge, but big models are better. Do we have data from 20 years ago to kind of compare, instead of just looking at the future and saying, here's what we have a few years ago, here's what we have in 2050. What did it look like 20 years ago or something like that? Am I worrying about 500,000 more miles driven in Arlington every single day in the future, or is that not a big deal? Because I've been here a little over 20 years and it's worse than it was. But, is what Arlington has been doing the last 20 years helping, or are we just now putting things in the model that'll get there? I also have one question about the VMT. 18 miles average per day. There's not many places in Arlington that are that far apart. So is this just like somebody who's commuting out to Loudon or commuting to Bethesda or something? How do you drive that far?
I would say, Carmen, can you answer that one? But my understanding, it's all trips that happen within the jurisdiction, right?
Starting or ending, correct.
So if someone hops on 66 at 50's Bridge from DC and rides it all the way to the Fairfax County line, that trip is one of those trips.
Yep, it was aggregated essentially all of the roadways within Arlington itself. So it could be anybody that's leaving or entering.
So somebody that leaves the middle of Arlington or the edge of Arlington and drives west for an hour, that's counted in this average?
Just
sorry, go ahead.
It's like a cookie cutter. So it's the miles that are traveled on Arlington's roadways. So it's that trip could happen, but if it's 60 miles, we're only going to call 15 of it VMT that happen in the county.
Yeah, that's just surprising. It seems like a huge number of miles. I mean, I drive halfway across Arlington to get to work, and that's only 5 miles. So
there and back is 10.
Yes. So how do you get 18 as an average?
66 and 395 carry a lot of vehicle trips.
Yeah, and I would maybe add that it's all the trips that you're going to take in the day. So not just the home to work, but if you're going out to shop, your other errands in the day, those are all additive.
Sure. Yeah.
And then if I can maybe, I'm sorry, go for it.
No, go right ahead. I appreciate you having more knowledge on it than me.
Well, I wanted to answer your first question, how have things changed? So something that we can certainly present in our future documentation of this. Kristen mentioned the Regional Transportation Survey. So that survey was completed in 2007 and 2008, and then an update was done 2017, 2018. And that's not quite 20 years, but that 10-year change did demonstrate that in Arlington County, there was a significant increase in walking and biking and a decrease in vehicle travel. So I think that that's kind of, we can use that as a basis to show that the trends that we're seeing now projecting out to 2050 are holding true in a sense, that the county's policies and the vision of the current MTP, the current plan, is working towards kind of a more evenly balanced or more walkable and bikeable Arlington.
Yeah, that's great. So you're saying in the last 20 years, even though the population has grown pretty substantially, the VMT has decreased?
Yes, based on that regional household transportation survey.
Yeah, no, I would have loved to see, very nice data presented today, but seeing 2007 or whatever, 2019 and the 2050 prediction kind of all stacked up to just to get a better sense of context on that, but very useful. Thank you, guys.
Pam, go ahead. You're next.
Thank you. First, thank you very much, Kristen, for putting this document up before the meeting so we could read it. It's really helpful to have that. A few questions. You say we don't have great bike ped data, yet you include some bike ped data in the current scenarios. And how can we get better bike ped data, and where are you getting the data that you're using for current projections? And then we will be doing performance measures after we work through the scenarios.
So let me answer your first question. So the model doesn't do bike ped data. Well, it tells us trips that are generated that don't leave the zone.
Mm-hmm.
And we can assume a number of those are walking. But what we did, and David can tell me if I'm saying this incorrectly, we actually looked back, like Aaron, you said we should. We looked back at our historical trends as far as like, I think you guys looked at 2006 household travel surveys, 2010 or 16, and we looked at those trend lines to see what our increases as a county were for our shares of walk and bike trips increasing. And we assumed growth continuing based off of the investments that we have in the county. So that's how we assume increases. And it's also informed by the fact that people are telling us that's how they want to travel. Like when we look at the questionnaire we did in the phase 1 outreach, 90% of people, I think it was 87% of people said they want to walk more. So like we know that we've seen these increases in the past. It's statistically shown through the survey data year over year that we see more walking and biking. And we have information from people in the community saying that this is what they want to do more often. So we assume that the transportation plan itself has called for continued investments in walking, biking, and Vision Zero, which means that if it's continuing to happen, if it's happening and we're continuing the investments, then it's going to keep happening. And then the second question was metrics. So the metrics from the model perspective are what we kind of talked about at the beginning. VMT, mode share, things along those lines, very high level for the scenarios, not the metrics that we're creating for the plan itself, but just kind of high level scorecards for these scenarios so we understand what they're moving the needle on or what their impacts would be to these transportation decisions.
A little comment on that and the 2 documents that you were talking about. Everybody seems to be studying a lot of driving metrics and not so much walking and biking. And can we have more metrics on walking and biking?
So and I'll pull that back up again. So this is one of those challenges. It's almost the inverse. We want to see all of those driving metrics go down.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing those driving metrics go down means the other metrics are going up. And if we're reporting out on what the forecast model is doing, this is what we can report out for the forecast model, because that's what this conversation is about just today. If we know that mode share is going up when we think about transit, that means fewer people are driving. If we see daily trips continuing to go down, if we see VMT continuing to go down, that trip lengths continuing to go down, it means that people are choosing other modes. So this is the thing that we said the forecast model is not good at, and we were going to do other pieces within the scenario planning qualitatively to look at these. We just kind of wanted to share what we can do with the forecast model, and we're not going to be able to share bike ped information directly from the forecast model. We can relate it from the information we're getting for things like if we have this many trips made on a daily basis, but only 15% of them are now vehicle trips, that means we know we're moving the needle in the other direction.
Thank you very much.
Dana, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. You're kind of the use of the 2019 trip counts is a little bit illusory because everybody's saying that we've seen these tremendous drop-offs after the pandemic, and by saying comparing 2019 to 2050, we're showing a maximum or a minimum growth, where if you looked at 2022, DMV data or those things, can we freshen up the data source a bit to maybe 2022, 2023? There's that one. And the Route 1 corridor is noticeably absent on your travel times.
So for the 2019 data, that's what the model's calibrated against. It's how they do the data. It's when they did the surveys. It's the information they have to make sure that it looked like 2019. The information the model was showing to people like Carmine, who live in it, that it made sense. Like the model was showing a realistic representation of transportation at that point in time. And unless you have a base that you trust, you can't build. So we could go in, and if we wanted to, we can look at some data sources just to kind of like gut check numbers from 2020 or 2023. that we have available, but we wouldn't be basing it off of the model. And I think it's very important to remember this is a specific tool we're using for a very narrow window of information. It's not how we're making our decisions about the planning process. And then we just didn't include all the corridors because then we didn't include Carlin Spring, or did we include Carlin Springs? Then we didn't include, people will start listing off the corridors that we chose not to.
No,
There's
I understand. I understand. You didn't include all the corridors in Arlington, but the Route 1 corridor is one of the major corridors in Arlington. Ignoring that one and doing George Mason from King Street to Columbia Pike is it looks like you're cherry picking. I'm sorry, it's just kind of conspicuously absent when the Route 1 corridor is one of the three major corridors for development and business activity in Arlington. Thank you.
John, you're up next.
Great. Thank you. Two questions. The first one is a slightly more technical question of what Joan originally asked. Is there an accepted value for the size of the error bars in some of these numbers when you do the model? For instance, VMT per capita down 15%. What is the plus or minus that's sort of built into the model?
Armin, I'm just going to ask you to.
There isn't technically an error bar. I mean, we're just reporting out on what the model can tell us. And like Kristen has said, it's sort of just a tool in the toolbox that we can use to help us predict or collect information. So there's no real error bar associated with it. You can use it to recognize trends, looking out to different model years and comparing different scenarios.
But within the modeling, yeah.
I would say the other element of that is, and just for folks who are unfamiliar with the way the modeling works, it's not as though we're running it once and then it gives us one answer. This is kind of a sequential process that's going to run multiple iterations and then it's going to average together. So that's going to work to kind of smooth out those error bars that you mentioned and get us to a value that is representative of something that we can trust and rely on to make some decisions, but not all decisions.
So you do have fairly high confidence in the actual number.
Not as an absolute number that we would say like this is 2050, you're going to hit it, but like yes, we're in the strike zone, I suppose.
Yeah, and the second question is, how do you begin to think about technological change? I know you said it's not included in the model, but we see it right in front of us. For example, e-bikes is a really step change in what's possible in a different mode of transportation. So how does one begin to think about that?
That's what the scenario planning is for. The current forecast model doesn't have that built in. But one of the reasons we're doing scenario planning is to think about the things that we haven't accounted for yet, or changes that we could make. There's a couple of different ways we can approach this. We're going to be taking an exploratory approach to our scenarios. What happens if we make investments in infrastructure or types of infrastructure could be a scenario. What happens if technology shifts and people travel in different ways? What if, e-bikes proliferate the short trips? What if autonomous vehicles become the way everyone travels and there's no inhibition on taking a 6-minute EV ride, AV ride, because there's always one around. There could be a scenario. There could be a scenario where we just assume people make very different decisions in the future. Maybe people choose to walk and bike because that's what they value now. What happens if people just stop traveling? Like, what if somehow we do return to a teleworks future? There's a lot of different kind of futures we can think about. And what we're going to do is sit down and understand what scenarios can tell us the most about policy making. Like, what scenarios create disparate enough futures, somewhat different enough that we can think about policy in either reaction to them and say, we don't want this future. What type of policy do we need to craft to encourage a different future? Or there is something we really like in this future. What did we add? Is it a preference choice for more transit? So how do we encourage that? Is it the investments we made in something? Okay, let's draft policy that says we should be doing these things. So it's really about creating a couple of different, it's not predictive. It's assumptions we as staff are going to be making with the consultant team about what we want to think about as far as these buffers. as information. We're not creating the future we want. We're not creating futures that we think are even going to happen. We're creating a couple of different touch points that will help us make sure that when we consider the future, there's lots of different preferences, pressure points, challenges that we're looking at.
So it will be quite interesting once you develop those scenarios and we can argue about what this should include or not. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question real quick. So with how people want to travel being an input and mode share being an output, they're very similar sorts of things. Can you talk about what the distinction is there? How, in what way does like preferences and how we travel go in, and in what way does the model then reflect back to us how people then actually choose to travel in the model?
Herman, I'm going to give an answer, but if anything I start to say is wrong, please do just cut me off.
Sure.
Chris, I think that's actually a really good question. And one of the things we've talked about is, well, what if we change those preferences? What if it's not an infrastructure we change? What if it's a preference we change in the model and we just say the current network as planned happens, but we say people, 80% of people are willing to walk and bike significantly more than they do today. There's a little bit of chicken and egg, you're right. The preferences are based off of travel time, friction, distance to transit, and things along those lines too. So if someone would be willing, like, your fake SimCity person would be willing to take transit if it only took them 30 minutes. But the transit options that exist around them take 45 minutes or more, their user is going to drive in this model, because the options that they're programmed to think are worth it aren't there. But if we provide transit in 30 minutes, that driver becomes a transit rider, which I think is actually a pretty fair representation of how people make decisions. It's not perfect. It's not that intuitive, but there's like basically millions of little profiles and decision making based off of historic decision making, based off of what people say they do and what they have been doing in the past, that it is a little bit of the chicken and egg that like people take transit and this is where they take transit, and the model continues to show that because they do. But then there's preferences built into their profiles that we can see when we add transit lines that are high frequency, that, oh, look, people are taking that transit line. Why are they taking that transit line? Oh, it met the thresholds that their profile had to take transit. So one of the things we're spitballing about is like, what if we change those thresholds? What if we change people's proclivity to ride the train or take the bus or walk or bike? What would that do? What would social change do?
Awesome. That's super helpful. Thank you. Joan, back around to you.
Sure. Just it actually kind of builds on your answer, is to what extent can the model really be disaggregated so you can look at different neighborhoods or areas. I'm kind of thinking particularly distinguishing between the high density areas where people are, kind of are close to entertainment, they're close to restaurants, they're close to shopping, they're close to transportation to get them to work in a lot of other places, versus people that are in less dense neighborhoods. And kind of how you work the modeling and tweaking it is to kind of sense of what kinds of gains can you get by, really kind of targeting different neighborhoods with different strategies, with you kind of an end goal of rapidly, kind of sharply reducing people's reliance on their own cars, which are going to be a little bit more in these denser or less dense neighborhoods than otherwise. And then the other is just looking at, you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. Part of that actually is going to come into a shift to electric vehicles, as well as then the grid shift to cleaner energy is what's the kind of modeling that might be done in conjunction with, because I don't think the modeling you're talking about now can really take that into account, but maybe I'm wrong.
It does, in so much as we assume whether trips are traditionally fueled or EV fueled. So like it's basically a percentage. MWCOG recently did, 3 or 4 years ago, a what would it take scenario, and it assumed every single vehicle trip was EV based. It just every trip, bus, car, vehicle, everything was EV tripped, and they shared what it was. MWCOG is our regional planning body, so they do a lot of this top-down thinking as well. So they did that, and it showed that EVs weren't the silver bullet we needed. We needed mode shift. So we've got some of that regional knowledge and example work to pull on as well that we'll kind of think about as, and MWCOG isn't one of the examples we shared, but they do a lot of big thinking around transportation. So in so much as we assume splits as far as if, we have 80% EV acceptance by 2050, we can say, well, this is what greenhouse gas emissions look like. If we've got 80%, we can say what it would look like if it was 20%, or we could, permutize a different scenario. As far as some of that nuanced neighborhoods versus urban area, there are levers you can pull in the model. There's assumptions. Those people who make decisions in our more suburban or less dense neighborhoods have different decision making than people who live in Boston or people who live in Crystal City, because there's different things that are available to them. The model isn't going to be a what will it take type of model. It's not going to tell us explicitly what we have to do in different neighborhoods to make those changes. What it's going to tell us is what would happen if we did things. It's not that detailed, and we don't want to get in the weeds that much. This is really just a check-in exercise for us to make sure that we're thinking about a lot of different futures, not a explicit, we shall understand exactly what happens in, Cherrydale under these 3 scenarios. It's big picture. It's making sure that we're gut checking how we create and draft policy at our comp plan level.
Thank you.
Tony, back to you.
Sorry about that. So on the question of density, now this may be controversial to some in the audience here, but with the missing middle EHO discussions or just other larger discussions about rezoning different parts of Arlington, particularly those lower density areas, is it worth running a scenario that, by the year 2050, there's increased density in areas where there is not at present, and how does that affect transportation?
So
I'm not weighing in on whether the merits of rezoning, but I think since a lot of the discussions have gone that way, it might be worth gaming out what can happen with transportation, because I know a lot of the negative comments through the EHO discussion were on transportation, specifically things like parking. So I think it might be a scenario worth addressing here in this realm of possibilities.
So we've talked about it a little bit. One of the things with the forecast model is that it's not sensitive at that scale. So it takes big land use changes to really show shifts in things like that. So changes in the RB corridor, changes on Langston across the corridor, but not wiggle room EHO level in the network. And it's also one of the things that we want to focus on is this is a transportation plan. We really want to think about what we're doing with the network, less about what land use is happening, because we do have our plan guidance that exists today for land use, and we want to be respectful and reflective of that in our policy making.
Sure, but I would argue that if a neighborhood is supposed to have, like say the zoning changes in a hypothetical universe, if a neighborhood is going to have 25% more people, let's just say that random number it would make sense to me to game out a scenario where there are 25% people. It's a land use conversation, like you said, but the impacts of that change in land use would have transportation implications. And I think that might be worth addressing.
Thank you for that, Tony. Dana, back to you.
Yeah, picking back up on Aaron's question about VMT, is it possible on that chart, to tease out the people that are starting in Loudoun and ending up in the district, because our ability to influence their behavior is, well, unless we put toll gates on 66, our ability to influence them is largely zero.
Yeah.
and we have, we show, more people starting and ending their trips in Arlington in 2019 than live in Arlington. So we know that, we know we're catching other people. Just add a row to each of those.
So
just the people passing through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of that like we recognize that this plan isn't what we are influencing there. It's kind of it's happening. So it's a fair
Well,
comment.
but if 150,000 of the 250,000 people are just passing through, our ability, we have to make really great changes to the 100,000 that we can influence if we want to see a 15% decrease in the big number. So we're kind of setting ourselves up to fail if we overlook or ignore the people that are spend their day in Arlington on 66 or 395 or 50, and they never actually stop.
Yep.
Thank you.
Joan, back to you.
I think you're still muted, Joan.
Sorry about that. It just kind of flipped that around in terms of the modeling, and how we can, make scenarios or assumptions related to, transportation changes, especially changes in transit across the region, and how does that actually reflect on what the pass-through traffic is through Arlington? Because I would think part of our objectives and goals of this plan is to move towards less pass-through traffic and, more use of transit regionally, which of course is going to require regional cooperation. So, and that might be something worth discussing with regional commission as we develop the plan too, and in terms of how do we start to think of connecting different objectives across communities, to get to kind of hopefully the same goals.
Yep. And I will say NVTA and the Transportation Planning Board, which is our regional planning body, do that work on a regular basis. There have been a lot of transit scenarios out there about like what would it take, how could we get there, that have been done. NVTA and the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, so very similar acronyms, but one's big picture, all transportation in Northern Virginia, and then the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission focuses on transit, have done a number of these like bus scenarios that are starting to actually be things that are happening. And it's something that we're looking at as we think about our modal networks and scenarios as we move forward.
Yeah, and they have a very impressive bus rapid transit proposal or vision. So I think, how do we maybe incorporate some of that visioning as if that really takes place? What does it mean for transportation in Arlington?
Alrighty, Aaron again.
Yeah, just a couple quick questions about the modeling stuff. First, going back to Dana's question about Route 1, all these meetings with VDOT about lowering Route 1 back to at grade, and did VDOT use the same model for it to make their predictions that it wouldn't negatively affect anything?
So Allison, I think you're a rep on it. My understanding would be that they would have used the forecast model for the vehicle numbers, and they probably brought those trip numbers into a more refined tool called Visum to see almost like literally where cars are going on the road.
So there is the ability to look at, because that's kind of a fundamentally large change. It doesn't say anything about people's preferences. It just says we're making a huge change to a major corridor, and what are the impacts going to be? Because I'm thinking about what if we actually do push towards or get the board to advocate for some large changes, like think about New York City and their congestion pricing. Is there something that Arlington in the future could do about VMT, charging everybody in Arlington for every mile they drive? Just in the future, that's not going to be a big deal. It could be done. And how would we use that as a lever, as you said, to really change some behavior and get Arlington more of what we want it to be, or even what they've just done in Paris with closing very many streets and seeing a huge uptick in cycling. Are we brave enough to do something other than just removing parked cars to increase cycling? Because we're not even good at that right now. But if we want to actually change the county, we have to have some bold initiatives. And I don't know if the model can do it, but I think we have some possibility to put some things in there that are much bigger than just nibbling at the margins and hoping that this growth doesn't affect us too much. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. Anybody else? Any more clarifying questions? I know it's a lot to understand the scenario planning and the modeling, but this will help us have less to digest when we get to the next meeting. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, for the pedestrians and cyclists, what has the county done to use something like Streetlight to figure out, plus the counters. We have a network of counters that we try to support, and plus, I think Streetlight might work pretty well for pedestrians and cyclists. Because virtually every one of them has a cell phone. Any ideas?
So I think Allison is our most versed, either Allison or Brian, in exactly how and where we use Streetlight data in our counters. We did provide a lot of the count data to Kimley Horn for existing conditions or our current snapshot. That was all captured within there. So we do use it. But Allison, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. And David, I think if you or Carmine have other thoughts on this that you want to jump in with, go ahead. But I think we have all these different tools we can use. The forecast model is one of them. Streetlight is one of them. All of these work better in different situations and different scales. Streetlight we can do at the countywide level, but it's more useful at, say, like a street or corridor level. Our bike ped counters, most of them are permanent counters. They're located in one point. And so the most valuable data we get from those is really longitudinal data where we're looking at, what is the change in bike ped activity at this one spot on the Custis Trail over years and years, and also seasonal changes. We can really get an idea of how behavior changes from month to month, what happens around daylight savings time, what happens with big events. So it's more useful for kind of snapshots in time and then also looking at kind of continuous time. But we have about 40 around the county. And because most of them are permanent, we're just getting those locations. And they really don't give us a full big picture of bike ped activity, especially at the full countywide scale. So we do use that. We use it a lot for our trail projects since a lot of our counters are on trails. We have some on street. We have a handful of mobile counters, but they don't give us as granular of data. They really just count warm bodies passing by, so we don't know if it's a pedestrian or a bike. So it's more kind of a generalized data set. But yeah, all those things are very useful and will come into play either in this planning process or in the corridor studies and other studies that come out of it.
Great. Go ahead. Back to John.
In developing the scenarios, is there a plan to do some formal benchmarking of other cities and efforts? As Aaron points out, dramatic results in Paris. We see plenty of examples in this country too, Lancaster, California, and others, where they have taken those bold steps and have measurable results. Will there be an effort to look at some of those examples?
What we've done really is looked at what cities have done from a scenario planning perspective. We're not looking at what people have done. This is much more understanding potential futures. It's not a let's go pull policies from everybody else. That's a lot more something we can do as we think about our policy development, is we can see what people have done and implemented and been like, that policy was effective there. Let's think about if that's a policy we want to use or craft similarly here, but it's not going to be something that's an informative component to our scenario development.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. All right. Last call for questions. Otherwise, I'm excited to move into the conversation about next steps and what is to come.
Yeah. So first, we just want to share. I know I sent out the email yesterday sharing that the board report was posted. We are officially on the agenda for Saturday. We're the first item. So we're thinking somewhere around 10:30. The vision statement has been modified mildly in the county manager's recommendation. However, the goal statements remain the same. The slight modification we did bold here, they changed the without having to depend on a car clause within the vision statement to with choices beyond using a car. There were concerns raised with conversations at leadership level that the term without having to depend on a car would be taken in a negative connotation. And they were looking for a way to reflect the spirit of that statement in a more positive tone. And they landed on with choices beyond using a car for the recommendation to the county board for the vision statement.
Any questions on that? So I'm sure everybody saw the email. This is going before the board on Saturday. Public comment on things that are not on the agenda, but this is on the agenda, is at 9:30, but actual agenda stuff starts at 10. The way it typically flows is they do one vote on the consent agenda items, which are the 49 things before this in one single vote, and then they move on to the first regular item, which is what this is. So as Kristen said, if you are all citizens, you are all welcome to talk to your elected officials. If you would like to express your thoughts further on the vision and goals, you can sign up to speak virtually via Teams. You can sign up to speak in person Saturday morning at 10, or you can just let it ride. Well, yeah, so seeing no questions about that, I think we can move ahead.
And then for next steps, we have a very exciting and busy fall planned. We're not going to have an advisory group meeting in August. August is a respected month free from public meetings. But we are going to come back very excited in early September to talk about our modal networks. And we want to do that conversation in person. So I'll be emailing in the next couple of days with a date and time option or two potentially, because we want to get that locked in because we're going to need a meeting room that's big enough to hold all of us. We do think that it's really important to have this meeting in person. It's just so much easier to talk about networks if we're sitting in front of a map together and having a conversation. So I do want to flag that it's not going to be a hybrid meeting. We are just going to go full-fledged for an in-person meeting for that, because to try and do it in a hybrid setting, I think would do a disservice to both people who are attending in person as well as people who are trying to participate virtually. So keep an eye out for that. That is going to be a very exciting conversation. We as staff are starting to roll up our sleeves this summer to really start thinking about everything we have already on the books, about what it tells us, and start to really reconcile some of the places we have conflicts. And we're also going to start dabbling in our, hierarchies on those networks. So we're going to have networks of priority for modes. We're going to have hierarchies on our streets, and we're going to start talking about our typologies a little bit too. So like what types of characters streets have. All of that is going to be sprinkled in September and October. In October, we're going to bring you a preview to phase 3 engagement, where we're going to have more information refined about the modal priority networks that we talked about in September, as well as a preview of the policy and the strategies. We are going to bring those public in the fall. We're thinking a late October launch with public engagement running through November. One of the things I do want to flag is you guys are going to get homework from the October meeting, where we share with you what we plan on taking to the public, those draft policies, draft networks, draft everything, much like we did for phase 2 engagement with the vision and goals. And during that November period, we're going to want your commission and committee's response, thoughts, perspectives, feedback on the drafts. Phase 3 engagement is going to happen. We hope you participate. And then we're going to have a early December meeting where we come together and we hear your feedback on those drafts, on the draft policies, on the draft modal networks, on the draft typologies, so that we can include that with everything we've heard through phase 3 engagement and create a refined set. If you're probably hearing similarities to how we approached the vision and goals, we're going to come out with a draft to the community. We're going to hear from the community. We're going to hear from you. We're going to hear from internal staff. We're going to take everything and we're going to refine it. And then we plan on sharing that again and hearing a little bit more and seeing what we maybe still need to work on. And then we're going to come up with a proposed plan, probably in a straw man form as far as policies go, and come back sometime in mid to late spring and share that before we have a draft plan pulled together. And that's about all we want to speak to with some level of confidence for meeting dates. It's 6 months of work, 7 months of work. It's going to be fast moving, very excited. We are going to try to share as much as we can in advance so that people are ready to have quality conversations. And we're ready and excited to have you come along with us. Happy to answer questions about everything I just threw at you, because I think this is the most number of meetings I've ever put on a slide for you.
Go ahead, Joan.
Yeah, just kind of interested in how the dynamics between the scenarios will work with the policies, because it looks like they're kind of be developed simultaneously. So to what extent, how do the scenarios inform the policies, or what policies should go with versus, with and then come up with the ultimate output?
So our policies are informed by our scenario work, but they're not dependent on it. So we're going to be doing scenario work over the summer. We're just letting you know we're doing it, and we're going to share kind of a little bit of what we learned when we share policies, kind of like what informed specific policies and why we think it's important, what these potential futures may have looked like. But it's not the driver of our work. It's not something that we want to focus the advisory group's energy on, because the driver and the most important components of the work are these modal networks. It is the policy. When we have policy conversations, we can talk a little bit about what we learned from scenario planning, but it is not the driver of our policy. It's a piece of probably like 17 different considerations we have when we develop policy. This is like a gut check for us. This is like, okay, we think this all makes sense. Doesn't make sense. So much of our policy is going to be rooted in what we already know, what our values are as a community. We're doing a robust internal review of all of the policies that exist within the current transportation plan. It's been sent out to about 35 people within our department. Kimley Horn's doing kind of a comparison for us too, to see what works, what's there, what we like, what we want to keep. We've done the 4 precedent plan review that we did through phase 1 engagement to see what they have from a policy perspective we like. We all probably have about, I want to say, 15 to 20 different transportation plans tabbed on our, personal search engine of choice, that we're making lists about, like, this policy makes a lot of sense. We like it. And we're going to bring all of that work together and then have a conversation with you guys about policies in October.
Thanks.
Anybody else? All right.
One more slide. The more graphically pleasing example of all of the advisory group meetings I just threw at you. So we really do want to celebrate that we're bringing the vision and goals to the board on Saturday. That is huge. That was so much work from you, from our community, from it's a huge deal, and we are very excited about the endorsement, because it's the board's direction to do this work. It is so important to us to have that so that we can do the networks, we can create the policy, we can build this plan that refreshes the future we're working towards. Again, phase 3 is going to be fall engagement. We're going to share more information as we have it. We're anticipating sometime in the spring releasing a draft plan for public comment. And then we're hoping for the fall of 2026 to bring this whole package to the board for their endorsement, and it will no longer, be Arlington's transportation future. We will have a refreshed transportation plan for the county. And with that, I am done.
All right, this is, I think, a final reminder that if you're here for public comment, you should drop your name in the chat so we can add you to the list, but I have not seen anybody go by. So at this point, if you want to give public comment, you can raise your virtual hand, you can type your name in the chat, or we can just wrap this meeting up. All right, I think we're going to call it no public comment tonight.
Thank you, Chris, so much.
All right, well, staff, best of luck with all of your pencil scribbling over the course of the summer. Look forward to seeing some potential in-person dates for early September. And I wish you all a fantastic summer and hope to see your smiling faces in a big room full of giant maps in September.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Oh, Pam, did you have a question? I think you're still muted, Pam.
No. I was actually trying to leave the meeting and I'm using my husband's computer and he has it set up weird.
No worries.
That was a great
All right.
meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you all in September.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.